It was the kind of day that could melt your soul right out of your body. The heat wasn't just heat, it was a weight. It pressed against your skin, crawled into your lungs, and stole the moisture from your mouth before you even had time to swallow. And on that particular day, I wasn't supposed to be anywhere but home. I'd only gone into town because I ran out of flour and my horse, Boone, needed fresh oats. Just a simple supply run. I wasn't looking for trouble. But trouble found me anyway. The trail I took home was empty for miles, in every direction. Nothing but scorched dust, brittle weeds, and the occasional buzzard circling something unfortunate. I was halfway between nowhere and further. The sun at its peak, when I saw it. A wagon, just sitting there, tilted slightly to one side like a drunk who'd run out of stories. It didn't make sense. There were no horses, no tracks suggesting a recent stop, and no signs of movement. Just a wagon baking under the ruthless eye of the sun. At first, I thought maybe it had broken down, and whoever was riding it had walked for help. Maybe they'd be back soon. But the closer I got, the more my stomach twisted. Then I heard it. Not loud, not clear, but unmistakable crying. Weak, thready crying, like something was running out of time to be heard. It wasn't the kind of cry that reached out and grabbed you. No, this one barely whispered through the dry wind, like it didn't have the strength to beg anymore. But I heard it. And once I did, I couldn't unhear it. I jumped down from Boone's saddle, boots kicking up hot dirt, and moved closer. The wagon was locked up tight. Canvas pulled over the top, its back sealed with thick chains looped and padlocked like someone was keeping something dangerous or precious inside. I pressed my ear to the side and the sound became clearer. More than one voice. Children. Crying, gasping, whimpering. Some sounded like they couldn't even muster the energy to call out anymore. My throat dried up instantly, and it wasn't from the heat. I peered into a small gap in the canvas near the front and caught a glimpse of a child's face-erd, slick with sweat, lips cracked. Another face beside her, smaller, barely conscious. Their eyes met mine, and something broke inside me. They weren't just scared. They were dying. I didn't have time to think. I grabbed the chain and pulled with everything I had, burning my hands in the process. It didn't budge. I tried to wedge my boot against the axle for leverage, but the iron links mocked me. No tools, no water, no backup. Just me, a few supplies, and the sound of children gasping for air. I couldn't go for help. The nearest town was over 2 hours by horse. They didn't have that long. Hell, I wasn't even sure they had 20 minutes. Panic clawed at the edges of my mind, but I forced it down. I told myself to breathe. I told myself I could fix this. I had to. I ran to my saddlebag, grabbed the heaviest thing I had, a small hatchet I used for firewood, and started swinging at the lock. Sparks flew. Metal rang against metal, but it held fast. The sound echoed over the plains like a bell tolling for the dead. And that's when I heard another sound, hooves. Fast. One rider. Coming in hot. At first, I felt hope. Maybe someone from town. Someone who could help. But when the rider emerged from the shimmer of heat, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake thinking this day couldn't get any worse. He wore a badge, real enough to fool most folks, but his eyes told a different story. Cold. Calculating. Flat as pond water. He pulled up his horse 20 feet away, dismounted slowly, and didn't even glance at the wagon. He looked straight at me. "You need to step away from that wagon," he said, like he'd been waiting to deliver that line his whole life. I didn't move. I couldn't. The children behind me were crying louder now, probably because they heard his voice. "There are kids in here," I said. "They're suffocating." He stepped closer, resting one hand on his belt, the other hovering just a little too close to his gun. "That wagon's part of an ongoing investigation. Step aside." His tone said he didn't care what or what was inside that wagon. And suddenly I knew. This wasn't a rescue. This was a cover-up. I gripped the hatchet tighter, even as sweat stung my eyes. I wasn't a fighter. I wasn't brave. But I was all those kids had. I had to stall, had to buy time. For what? I didn't know yet. But I wasn't going to walk away. Not today. He stepped closer. I could hear the gravel crunch under his boot, slow, deliberate, the way a man walks when he already knows he owns the outcome. He didn't step back. He wore the uniform of a deputy, crisp shirt, faded badge, polished gun holster. But the confidence in his gait wasn't the kind that came from serving the law. It was the kind that came from knowing the law wouldn't come for him. "Ma'am," he said again, voice flat. "Step away from the wagon." I kept the hatchet clutched in both hands, though it was shaking now. Not from fear, at least, not entirely. My body had kicked into something primal. Protect, resist, survive. "There are children inside," I said. "They're dying." He tilted his head slightly, like he was listening to birdsong, not human suffering. "I know," he said. Those two words hit me harder than a punch to the gut. Not a flicker of regret in his tone. Not a trace of urgency. Just confirmation. He knew. He knew they were in there. He knew they were chained, suffocating, dehydrated. And he didn't care. My grip on the hatchet tightened. "You're not a deputy," I said, heart thudding. "Not a real one." He smiled then, just barely. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "I'm exactly what they needed to keep things quiet," he said. "No questions, no loose ends." Then he took a step closer and I finally moved. Not away. Forward. I raised the hatchet like it weighed nothing and swung with all the desperation my body could channel. Not at him, not yet. I went for the lock again. Sparks flew, metal shrieked, still unbroken. He drew his weapon. I turned to face him fully, my back now to the wagon. I held the hatchet in both hands, my palms raw and red. "I don't know who you work for," I said. "But if you think I'm going to let you put those children back in the ground, you'll need more than a badge and a gun." For a moment, we stood like that. Just the two of us. Dust swirling around our boots, the sun painting everything in cruel gold, the cries of children scratching at the wind behind me. Then came the voice that saved my life. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." I didn't see where it came from at first. Neither did the fake deputy. But his gun hand froze in place. The voice was old, tired, but sure. It belonged to someone who'd lived long enough to mean every word. From behind a cluster of scorched rocks, maybe 50 yards off, an older man stepped into view. Rifle raised. Steady as a sermon. He wasn't dressed for drama. Just work clothes. A sun-bleached shirt, a battered hat, and a neckerchief the wind wouldn't quit tugging. His boots were scuffed, but his stance was military disciplined. He didn't look like a savior. Just someone too stubborn to let evil pass unnoticed. "You deaf, son?" the old man called out, shifting his rifle to rest squarely on the deputy's chest. "Put the iron down." The deputy didn't lower his weapon, but he didn't raise it either. "Law enforcement business," he called back. "Keep walking, old man." The old man laughed at a short, bitter sound. "Real lawmen don't leave kids to die in a hot box, and they sure as hell don't pull their guns on women trying to save them." I didn't dare move. I barely breathed. The deputy glanced at me, then back at the rifleman. Then he did something I didn't expect. He took a step back. Not much, but enough. "Who are you?" he asked. "Name's Frank Holloway," the old man replied. "And I've been tracking that wagon for 2 days." Frank stepped closer, keeping the rifle steady. His voice dropped, heavy with pain. "My granddaughter, Sarah, was taken from her school in Millfield. 8 years old. Blonde hair. Blue dress." He stopped 10 paces from us. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you, deputy?" The badge man said nothing, but his face gave it away just for a flicker. Recognition. And then, behind me, from inside the wagon, came the softest voice I'd ever heard. "Grandpa Frank?" Everything shifted in that moment. Frank's whole body went still. The rifle didn't drop, but his hands trembled. "Sarah?" he asked, voice cracking for the first time. "I'm here, Grandpa," she called. "I'm so scared." Frank's voice turned to ice. "You've got 3 seconds to unlock that wagon before I put a bullet through your spine." The deputy's bravado drained like water through a sieve. "Wait now," he said, slowly raising one hand. "Let's not be hasty. 1. I can explain. 2. He reached into his vest and pulled out a key, but his eyes stayed locked on mine. And I saw Ithitrid, yes, but fear too. He was afraid now, not just of Frank, of what was coming, of who else might be watching. These kids, he muttered. You don't know who they belong to. They're not ordinary. Frank barked out a laugh that wasn't amused. Son, I've been dangerous longer than you've been breathing. Open that damn wagon. And he did. The key turned with a heavy clunk, and I wasted no time. I yanked open the doors, peeled back the canvas, and the stench hit me first. Sweat, blood, heat, fear. A prison rotting in the sun. And there they were. 9 children, huddled together like cattle, skin flushed, lips dry, eyes too tired to widen at the light. Most were limp. One little girl was curled in the corner, Sarah, her blue dress torn at the hem. The oldest, maybe 14, was shielding 2 of the smaller ones with his body. I don't remember crying, but I must have. My face was soaked. Frank was beside me in a second. He called for water, medicine, shade, anything. He was still holding the rifle, but his hands now shook for a different reason. I reached into my saddlebags for the canteen, poured precious water into trembling hands, lifted tiny heads. Let the smallest ones drink first. And that's when the thunder started. Not wither. Hoofbeats. Fast. Furious. Multiplying. Frank froze, then turned toward the horizon. I followed his gaze. A dust cloud. Not natural. Organized. 5 riders, coming hard. Weapons glinting in the sunlight. Frank's voice turned grim. We've got maybe 3 minutes before this turns into a slaughter. The deputy smiled for the first time. A slow, cruel thing. My partners, he said. They're not as patient as I am. I looked down at the children. Some unconscious. Some sobbing. And I realized we weren't out of danger. We were standing in the middle of it. To this day, I still remember the exact sound of those hooves. Not just the rhythm of galloping horses, but the hunger in them. Like a heartbeat that had learned to devour. I didn't have time to think. Didn't have time to pray. Frank and I locked eyes for half a second, and that was all we needed. He knelt beside the children and whispered to them. His voice shook. Not from fear, but from fury disguised as calm. I turned and stared at the oncoming riders. 5 of them. Uniformed not in badges, but in leather. Guns slung lazily, like afterthoughts. Their dust-covered faces weren't hidden because they had no need to hide. This was their land, their game, their trap. The fake deputy, who was now slumped near a rock with his wrists tied by Frank's old belt, grinned as they approached. They'll kill you both, he said, with a kind of pleasure that made me want to hit him with the butt of my hatchet. And the kids? If you're lucky, they'll die quickly. He didn't respond. I couldn't afford Rajana yet. Rage made people sloppy. And today, I had 9 lives in my hands. Frank stood beside me again, rifle raised, lips tight. Keep them inside the wagon, he said, nodding toward the children. Cover them with the canvas. You hear gunfire? You take the rear door and run west toward the canyon ridge. Don't stop. Not for anything. I'm not leaving you. You will if it comes to that. He said it without looking at me. That was the kind of man Frank was. One who'd already counted the cost of sacrifice. I stepped back and pulled the canvas over the wagon's opening. The children were barely responsive. Only Sarah seemed alert, her little hand clutching her grandfather's coat sleeve, even as I pulled her away. I'll come back for you, I whispered to her. She nodded, but her eyes were full of doubt. She'd already seen too many promises broken. When I returned to Frank's side, the riders were close enough to smell. Sweat, gunpowder, rotten whiskey. Death rode with them. The lead rider pulled his horse to a stop and smiled wide, almost friendly, if you didn't look too hard. Well now, he drawled, spitting a wad of tobacco onto the dirt. Ain't this a warm welcome? You folks throwing a party? Frank didn't answer. The man looked past us, toward the wagon. Then his smile faded. Where's Sheriff Griggs? Dead. I lied. The man cocked his head. That's so? Bullet through the eye, Frank added, calm as still water. Didn't even get to blink. They looked at one another. Silent language passed between them. Calculations. Caution. Then the leader dismounted, slowly. He was tall, maybe 40. Built like a tree, not muscle-bound, just heavy. His eyes were cold and gray like river rock. "I reckon you know. You've stepped into something you shouldn't," he said. "That wagon don't belong to you." "I disagree," I said. "Anything that carries stolen children belongs to justice." That made one of the others laugh. A short, barking sound, but the leader didn't laugh. He stared at me for a long time, and I could feel the weight of it, like he was deciding whether I was worth killing clean or messy. "You're brave," he finally said. "Or stupid. Hard to tell." "Doesn't matter," Frank said, raising his rifle slightly. "You take another step toward that wagon, and I'll show you the difference." The air cracked with tension. Even the wind held its breath. One of the riders nudged his horse forward. "Boss?" he asked. "Hold," the leader snapped. Then he looked at me again. "You got no idea what those kids are worth," he said, almost softly. "Not in gold, not in silver, but in what they know. What's inside them?" I frowned. "What are you talking about?" He gave a slight shake of the head. "Doesn't matter. All you need to know is you're playing with fire. Government fire. High-end contracts. The kind that don't get printed in papers." Frank didn't waver. "You kidnapped them," he said. "Tortured them. You think a fancy reason makes it less evil?" The leader's lips curled. "I think you've got 10 seconds left to walk away, or be buried right here." Silence fell again. Even the horses seemed to know it. And then, without a signal, everything exploded. The fourth rider reached for his shotgun. Frank fired first. The blast echoed like thunder across the plain. The rider was thrown backward off his horse, his weapon tumbling into the dust. Then chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked the sky open. I ducked behind a boulder, hatchet still in hand. I didn't know what good it would do against bullets, but it made me feel less helpless. Frank moved like a man possessed. Each shot from his rifle deliberate, lethal. He hit the second rider clean in the shoulder, spun him off his mount. I caught sight of the deputy, still tied, wriggling like a snake. "You're all dead," he screamed. "You hear me? Dead!" A bullet pinged off the rock inches from my face. I crawled low and fast around the side of the wagon. I had to check on the kids. I pulled back the canvas, Slight still breathing, still alive. Terrified, but alive. Sarah reached for me again. "Is Grandpa okay?" she asked. He swallowed hard. "Yes." I hoped it wasn't a lie. Then I heard Frank cry out. Not a yell of pain, not a scream, just a sharp, broken gasp. I scrambled back around the wagon and saw him. On one knee, blood on his side. Rifle dropped. The leader stood over him, gun drawn. "Should have walked away," he said, raising the barrel. And I didn't think. I just ran. I sprinted full tilt across the dirt, not caring about angles or cover, just movement, just velocity. The hatchet was in my hand. The world blurred. And I screamed not a word, just sound, raw and primal. The leader turned at the last second, saw me coming. His eyes widened. Then the hatchet hit his wrist with a sickening crunch. He screamed, dropped the gun. Frank lunged upward, knife in hand, and drove it into the man's gut. Blod sprayet. And then everything went still. 3 men dead. 2 fled. 1 wounded. And Frank? He collapsed into my arms. "I'm fine," he muttered, voice thin. "Just a scratch." It wasn't, but I nodded anyway. I held pressure on his wound as best I could. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I let myself breathe. We had won. Not the war, not yet, but the battle. And for now, that was enough. Frank was bleeding too fast. I could feel the warmth of it soaking into my sleeves, pooling between my fingers as I pressed down on his side. His shirt, already dusty and torn, was now a canvas of red. He gritted his teeth, eyes half-lidded, jaw clenched not from pain but from the effort to stay conscious. "I've had worse," he muttered. No, you haven't, I snapped. Stop lying to yourself. He gave a weak smile. I had to try. I looked around. The dust from the shootout still lingered in the air, hanging like smoke after a fire. 2 horses had bolted off. One rider was still groaning somewhere in the distance, but he wouldn't be a problem for long. The leader, the one Frank had gutted, lay dead at our feet, his eyes wide open, like he still didn't believe he'd been beaten. We didn't have time to bury anyone. Didn't have time to burn the bodies either. Time, as always, was our enemy. I tore a length of fabric from the deputy's shirt, wouldn't be needing it anymore, and pressed it tight against Frank's wound. He winced, but didn't scream. I wrapped it as tightly as I could, tying it off just above his hip. You're not dying here, I said. He raised an eyebrow. You ordering me? Yes. All right then. We had to move. We couldn't stay here. Those riders, they were just the first wave. If what the leader had said was true, this went deeper than just a child smuggling operation. Government contracts, experiments, hidden knowledge. The children were part of something bigger, and now we were part of it too. Frank tried to stand but collapsed back down. I caught him under the shoulders and helped him into the wagon. The children huddled in the corner, staring with wide eyes. Sarah was holding her brother, whose cheeks were still stained with tears. I looked into their faces, and suddenly, I didn't feel tired anymore. Veldborpus. We're moving, I told them. Now! I got behind the reins and clicked my tongue. The horses were nervous, but they obeyed. We turned off the trail and into the lower hills, where fewer people would see us. I needed to find shelter, somewhere we could hide for the night, somewhere I could tend to Frank, somewhere safe. But safety was a fantasy out here. We rode in silence for nearly 2 hours. Frank drifted in and out. The kids didn't speak. Even Sarah was quiet now. She just stared out the back of the wagon, as if expecting the world to crumble behind us. Eventually, I spotted what I was looking for. An old mining shack, half collapsed but still standing, tucked between rock formations, hidden from the main trails. It looked abandoned and, more importantly, dry. I steered the wagon close and helped Frank out. He leaned on me as we made our way inside. Dust exploded with every step. The place smelled like iron, ash, and memory. I laid Frank down on a cot that barely held his weight and checked the bandages again. The bleeding had slowed, but the color in his face was fading too. I need firewood, I muttered to myself. Water. Something to clean this. I'll be fine. Frank rasped. Shut up. He chuckled once, then groaned. You make a terrible nurse. I looked at him. He was trying to keep the mood light for my sake. But I saw the truth in his eyes. He knew how bad it was. And I think, in his own way, he was preparing himself for goodbye. I left the kids inside and went out, quickly gathering what I could. A few dry branches, a cracked basin filled with rainwater, some scraps of cloth from a forgotten tarp hanging behind the shack. When I returned, I saw Sarah standing over Frank, holding his hand. Her face was unreadable, but her brother was crying insolently this time. I lit a small fire in the corner and boiled what little water I had. Then I did what I could: wash the wound, packed it with cloth, rewrapped it tighter. It wasn't enough, but it was all I had. Later, as night fell, I sat just outside the shack, listening for hooves, listening for death. Instead, I heard a voice, a whisper. Behind me. I turned slowly. Sarah was there. She sat beside me, small legs drawn to her chest. For a while, she said nothing. Then, finally, they took us from school. Her voice was calm, too calm, like she was repeating a script she'd memorized. They said we were special, that we had something in our blood, something old, something powerful. I stared at her. What kind of something? She shrugged. They never told us, just that we'd help fix the world one day. But they hurt us. They did tests, needles, lights, questions. Over and over. My chest tightened. How long? Months. Maybe a year. I don't know. She looked up at me. They made us forget things. But sometimes, I still remember. He hesitated. And your parents? She flinched, then looked away. They burned our house, said it was the only way to contain it. I felt sick. Not just at the horror of it, but at the way she said it. Like she didn't quite understand it yet. Like part of her still thought it might be a lie. Or maybe a dream. What do they want from you now? I asked. Sarah didn't answer. But I could feel it in the silence. They wanted her back. And they'd burn the whole world to do it. I stayed up that night, rifle in my lap, eyes on the stars. The desert was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that made you feel watched. Frank slept fitfully. The kids huddled together under blankets. And I watched the fire. Not for warmth, but for light. Because whatever darkness was coming next, I needed to see it coming. The next morning arrived without sound, just light. It spilled slowly over the cracked earth. A pale orange that didn't warm so much as expose. The kind of dawn that doesn't bring comfort, only consequence. Frank was still alive. That surprised me more than it should have. His breathing was shallow but steady. His skin no longer looked like paper soaked in rain. I wasn't sure if it was my field medicine or his own stubbornness that pulled him through the night, but he was still with us. I made him drink water by the spoonful. Sarah watched silently. The boy Liam, I had learned, clung to her like he'd been born to her hip. His trust in her was absolute. Mine, too, was beginning to form, though I didn't yet understand why. We couldn't stay here. Even with the shack shielding us from the road, we were exposed. If they were tracking Usend, I had no doubt they'd find the trail eventually. Horses always left a story behind. And even without horseshoes, the wagon's weight had left grooves in the dirt that I could follow with my eyes closed. By mid-morning, I was packing. Frank tried to sit up. I stopped him. "You're not riding," I said. "Then we're staying." He shot back, voice still rough. "You'll ride in the wagon. I'm not dead weight. Not yet. But if you bleed again, you will be." That shut him up. Sarah climbed into the wagon first. I gave her a nod of thanks, and she returned it with something between a smirk and a question. There was something old in her eye shoulder than a child should carry. Not in a creepy way. Just burdened. As I hitched the horses, I noticed something strange. The smallest rock formation to the east had been disturbed. Just slightly. A few pebbles scattered down that hadn't been there before. My hand went to my rifle. I didn't see anyone. Didn't hear anyone either. But I felt it. We were being watched. I didn't say anything. No sense in panicking the children. I climbed up, snapped the reins, and turned us east, opposite the disturbance. It wasn't ideal, but the canyons in that direction gave us a better shot at cover. I planned to lose our trail in the dry creek beds by sundown. The hours rolled by like sand across slate. Windless. Still. But under it all, the sense remained that eyes were behind us. Waiting. Measuring. Frank drifted in and out. Sarah sat next to him, her hand on his wrist, checking his pulse every time he looked too still. I watched them from the corner of my eye. There was a bond forming between those two, like a thread quietly pulling together two lost souls. It was around midday when we reached the canyon mouth. Tall stone pillars jutted into the sky, shadows slicing the ground in long, jagged fingers. I led the horses carefully. The trail narrowed. If someone were waiting in the cliffs, they'd have the advantage. And of course, someone was. It happened so fast, I didn't even register the first shot. The sound came from above, echoing, sharp, distant. The second one was clearer. A puff of dust exploded at the base of the wagon's side. "Down!" I shouted. Frank rolled off the cot with a grunt, pulling the kids down with him. I jumped down and yanked my rifle off the back. "Sarah, cover Liam's ears," I said. "No matter what happens, keep your heads down." Another shot. Closer. I scanned the cliffs, movement left side, high point. I aimed. Exhaled. Fired. A scream. Then silence. But only for a moment. Because a voice called out, calm, deep, laced with irony. "I didn't come to kill you." I froze. The voice wasn't military. Wasn't scared either. "You shoot at us, then say that?" I called back. "You shot first," the voice replied. My stomach dropped. Because he was right. I had to know if you'd react like them, the voice said. The ones chasing you wouldn't miss the first shot. He emerged slowly from behind a rock pillar tall, lean, wrapped in a weathered brown coat. No insignias, no rifle in his hands, just a flask and a tired face. He looked like someone who'd been walking for 100 years. Who are you? I asked. He took a swig from the flask. Name's Garrett. Used to be one of them. Before I found out what they were doing. He didn't lower me rifle. Garrett nodded at the wagon. The kids, they're not what you think. I already knew that. Sarah climbed out slowly. Her voice was ice. You worked in the labs? Garrett's eyes darkened. I guarded the transports. I didn't know at first what was inside. They kept us in the dark. Said it was biological cargo. Dangerous diseases. But I knew they were lying. Eventually, I opened one of the crates. He looked directly at Sarah. It was you. Silence. I lowered my rifle just slightly. Garrett stepped forward. They're tracking her, he said, gesturing toward Sarah. Not with eyes. Not with satellites. With resonance. Frequency patterns from the spinal stem. They call it the Bloom signal. Once it activates, it doesn't stop. Doesn't fade. She's a beacon. Sarah looked down. She already knew. How do we stop it? I asked. You don't. That wasn't what I needed to hear. But, Garrett added, there's a place, a node, deep in the desert. Old tech. Pre-collapse. They use it to amplify the signal, but it can also invert it. Break the frequency. Like cutting a wire underwater. Where? I asked. He pointed south. 4 days by horse. Maybe 3 if you don't stop. Frank groaned behind me. He couldn't survive 3 more days on the trail. Not like this. You'll have to choose, Garrett said. Save him or save her. Sarah didn't hesitate. Save him. Everyone turned. I stared at her. What? She stepped forward. He saved us. If they find me again, I'll go with them. But he doesn't deserve to die because of me. Frank, pale and dazed, tried to lift his head. Don't be stupid, kid. Garrett looked impressed. She's not stupid. She's awake. I closed my eyes. My heart was hammering. The canyon felt tighter now, like the walls were closing. We had 2 paths opposite directions. One toward a miracle. One toward mercy. And no time to choose. I opened my eyes. We ride, I said. All of us. You'll never make it, Garrett warned. Then you'll help. He smiled, slow and grim. Thought you'd never ask. The wind shifted sometime during the night. At first, it was nothing, just the occasional whistle between rocks. But by morning, it had become something else entirely. The kind of wind that strips spark from trees, memory from minds, and will from bodies. We left the canyon at first light. Frank's color hadn't improved, but his will was stronger than any wound. I propped him against the side of the wagon with blankets and water-soaked cloth. He didn't say a word, just watched the sky with the hollow stillness of a man who knows time is slipping. Garrett rode ahead. I didn't ask why he helped us now, didn't care. People like him didn't switch sides because of guilt. They did it because whatever they had once believed in had finally collapsed under its own weight. Maybe he saw something in Sarah that reminded him of what the world used to be. Or maybe he just wanted to die doing something that mattered. We pushed south. The land turned flatter, crueler. What once had been roads were now just memories etched faintly in the ground. Cracks lined the soil like a broken mirror. There were no trees here, no birds. Only the hush of sand and the wheezing of the wind. Every mile felt like an hour. Every hour, a day. Sarah didn't complain. She didn't ask how long or how far. She simply held Liam and stared straight ahead, like she knew that if she let her gaze wander, something would unravel inside her. She was still just a child, but she had the stillness of someone who had seen too much, too early. We didn't talk. There was nothing to say. Garrett stopped us around midday near a shattered concrete slab that might once have been part of a rest stop or an old outpost. He kicked at the dust and uncovered a rusted hatch, buried under decades of sand and silence. Without a word, he pulled it open. It led to a stairwell, crumbling, dark. The air that spilled out smelled like metal and ghosts. He motioned for me to follow. I told Sarah and the boy to stay in the wagon. We descended. The corridor below was narrow, the walls lined with old fiber cable and long dead lights. Garrett moved like he'd been here before. Maybe he had. The silence down there was thick enough to chew, and every step echoed like a shout. At the end of the hall, he stopped in front of a locked door. The keypad was rusted. His fingers hovered over it like he was remembering something painful. Then he entered a sequence, slow and deliberate. The door clicked open. Inside was nothing remarkable, just dust, a few shattered screens, and a terminal that somehow still blinked with a faint green light. Garrett sat down in front of it, cracked his knuckles, and began typing. I didn't understand half the symbols that flashed across the monitor. What I did understand was this. We weren't just running from something anymore. We were walking into its shadow willingly. Garrett's voice broke the silence not aloud, but in the clicking of keys, the rhythm of someone undoing old sins. I didn't interrupt. After several minutes, he leaned back and exhaled like someone who had just unburdened a lifetime. It's done, he muttered. We're off the grid for now. The bloom's still active, but they won't be able to triangulate it for at least a day. That meant 24 hours. That was all we had. We emerged into the sunlight again, and I almost fell backward. The brightness after the dark felt like punishment. Frank was asleep. Sarah was sharpening a stick with a small rock, not for use, but maybe for comfort. Liam was drawing circles in the dirt with his fingers, humming a song I didn't recognize. We moved on. By sunset, the air turned colder, which felt almost wrong. The ground was still hot beneath our boots, radiating everything it had absorbed. The clouds above weren't clouds at all, but smoke. Far off, in the direction we'd come from. They were burning something. Or someone. That night, we camped without fire. I couldn't sleep. The stars didn't comfort me like they used to. They felt too big, too distant, like they were watching, but incapable of caring. I sat by the wagon wheel, my rifle across my knees, and waited for something I couldn't name. I must have dozed off. When I woke, Sarah was gone. Panic kicked in immediately. I grabbed the rifle and followed the faint tracks she'd left behind. They led only a few meters away, to a small rise in the dirt. She was kneeling there, hands clasped, praying. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The boy was asleep in the wagon. Garrett was snoring softly a few feet from the horses. I watched her for a moment, unsure whether to interrupt. Something about that small, silent moment, their silhouette against the ruined sky, felt like a sacred thing. Not because of any god she was praying to, but because she still believed it mattered. The next morning, the real desert began. No shade, no landmarks. Just an ocean of dust, cracked earth, and sunburned sky. The horses were slower now, tired. The wagon creaked more with every mile. Frank barely opened his eyes. By noon, we had to stop. Heat shimmered in the distance like false lakes, mirage after mirage. The horizon blurred into the sky, and the sky into madness. I poured the last of the clean water into Sarah's canteen and gave it to her. She didn't drink it. She gave it to Liam. Hours passed, maybe days. Time lost meaning in that heat. Eventually, the sand turned whiter, fine, almost like powdered bone. Garrett pointed to the south, where a jagged line rose from the Eartha facility. Fenced, half-submerged, surrounded by antennae and metal arms that reached skyward like skeletal fingers. That was it. The place. We pushed forward. As we approached, I saw what the old stories meant by the edge of the world. Not a cliff, not a wall, but a place where the land simply ended. Where silence grew teeth. Where things that should have never been built still breathed, still pulsed, still waited. The node, the bloom inverter. It was closer than it had ever been. And so was the danger. I looked at the others. Garrett ready to face whatever came. Sarah silent, steady, carrying something none of us could see. Liam too small to understand, too brave to break. Frank breathing barely. We were out of time. The next steps would take us into the heart of it all. Into the machine. Into the truth. And maybe, if we were lucky, back out again. But luck had never been kind to people like us. We reached the outer perimeter just as the last hint of light drained from the sky. The facility loomed before us like a long-forgotten God-silent, still, and impossible to ignore. Metal bones pierced the air, twisted and scorched by decades of sandstorms and abandonment. Antennae hung like withered arms, pointing not to the stars, but down into the earth, into secrets no one should have kept. The silence was unnatural. Not the kind that comes when life settles, but the kind that settles after life has ended. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. No birds, no insects, not even the low hum of electricity. Just a void wrapped in rusted steel and ghost-colored ash. Garrett stepped forward first. I didn't ask if we were ready. He knew we weren't. He pushed against the broken fence, and it crumbled like paper. A gust of sour air spilled out, smelling of oil, ozone, and old blood. I helped Frank down from the wagon. His legs could barely hold him, but his eyes, those sunken, flickering eyes, had something in them now. Not fire, not hope, just the quiet recognition of inevitability. Sarah took Liam's hand. He didn't resist. We walked in together. The facility's inner yard had once been paved, but time had shattered it. Each step we took echoed against the hollow shell of broken towers. Security turrets, long dead, hung like vultures above us. Doors stood open or twisted off their hinges. The sky above seemed dimmer here, like the darkness clung to this place more stubbornly. Garrett led us to a circular hatch, half buried in sand. "This is where it begins," he said. More to himself than to us. No one responded. The hatch was sealed with an old biometric lock, long obsolete. Garrett reached into his coat and pulled out a thin shard of metal etched with circuitry. A bypass key. He pressed it against the panel. Lights flickered, died, then blinked once more. The door opened with a groan that sounded like the earth itself resenting the disturbance. Inside was a tunnel. Not man-made in the traditional sense. This had been carved by machines long ago with cold precision. The walls were smooth, not a single wire in sight. Just sterile metal, slick with condensation, glowing faintly from embedded veins of blue light. As we descended, I began to feel it. A pull, not gravity, not air pressure, something deeper. It was like walking into the mouth of something alive. The tunnel led us down for what felt like hours. We passed empty rooms, laboratories abandoned mid-experiment, glass tubes shattered, terminals blinking with corrupted data. In one chamber, dozens of isolation pods stood open, their interiors blackened with time and something darker. Sarah slowed as we passed one of the rooms. Inside, on the wall, someone had written a single word in dried blood. Reversal. She didn't ask what it meant. She just kept walking. Eventually, the tunnel ended at a vast chamber. We stood on a balcony overlooking a massive hollowed-out sphere of steel and shadow. At its center floated a machine unlike anything I'd ever seen. It pulsed with a rhythm too perfect to be human, too chaotic to be artificial. Around it spun rings of light data, memory, thought locked in endless orbit. The inversion core. Garrett's voice was low. This is the original node. The first. The one that learned to rewrite causality. He turned to face us. We're not here to destroy it. My fists clenched before I could stop myself. Then what are we here to do? He looked at Liam. To give him a choice. The boy looked up at Garrett. His eyes were wide, but not afraid. Garrett stepped to the control panel and entered another code. A platform extended from the balcony, leading to the center of the sphere. No rails. Just a narrow bridge over infinite depth. Sarah held Liam's hand tighter. You mean to send him in there? Garrett nodded. He's the carrier. The bloom inside him. Frank didn't inject a virus. He injected a key. Frank, despite his weakness, managed a small, bitter laugh. Always wanted to build something that would break the world and save it. The wind inside the chamber picked up not from air movement, but from pressure. Reality itself began to feel unstable. Sounds had echoes before they were made. Colors shimmered into others. My hands itched with phantom memories I hadn't lived. "We have minutes," Garrett said. "Then the signal finds us again." I looked at the boy. He looked back at me, not scared, just waiting. I nodded. We walked him out together, me, Sarah, Garrett. Frank stayed behind, unable to move. At the edge of the platform, Liam stopped and turned to his sister. She didn't speak. She knelt, kissed his forehead, and stepped back. He took the final steps alone. When he reached the core, it pulsed brighter. Then, light, blinding. A hum that cracked the air. The rings around the machine spun faster. Data screamed through the air in glowing ribbons. Symbols danced across the sphere's surface, languages I'd never seen, ideas I couldn't understand. Then, everything stopped. The light vanished. And Liam was gone. The platform retracted. Silence. And then one line of text appeared on the console. Protocol inversion. Awaiting directive. Garrett stared at it, then slowly typed. Run memory overwrite. Earth last known safe configuration. The machine hesitated, then began to hum again. Not violently this time. Like a heartbeat. Frank collapsed to the floor. Sarah wept, but didn't make a sound. Garrett turned to me. We just gave the world a second chance. I wasn't so sure. The ground beneath us trembled. The chamber lights flickered. Garrett turned back to the console. We have to go. It's going to reboot everything. And I mean everything. What happens to us? I asked. He didn't answer. He just smiled. The way a man smiles before a storm that might wash him clean or pull him under. When I opened my eyes, I expected light. Instead, I found mist. Thick, rolling fog blanketed the air around me, cool and weightless, yet it clung to my skin like something sentient. There was no ground, no sky, just an endless gray-like. The world had been painted over with forgetting. At first, I thought I had died, but then I heard it. A whisper. Not in my ears, in my bones. It spoke no language I knew. It was a sensation raw, old, heavy with memory. Like something deep beneath time had stirred and was now exhaling its first breath. I stood slowly. I was barefoot. The ground was soft, too soft. Every step felt like I was walking on the ghosts of thoughts never spoken. Shapes began to emerge through the mist. Familiar shapes. The barn from my childhood. The alleyway where I lost my brother. My father's study. Still smelling of pipe smoke and war. I wasn't just in a place, I was in all places I'd ever been. Not one at a time, but all at once. They bled into each other. Stitched by memory and sorrow. Every corner held a younger version of me, flickering in and out like bad film. Then I saw Sarah. She stood beside the crumbling well from our village, the one we used to throw wishes into. But she wasn't now Sarah. She was younger, thinner. The Sarah before the fires, before the camps, before we had lost so much. She didn't see me. She was speaking to someone, a little boy, Liam. But Liam didn't respond. He looked frozen in time. Not dead. Not alive. Just paused. Garrett appeared next, seated at a chessboard inside a train car I recognized from a dream I once had. He was playing against a mirror version of himself, older, colder. The pieces moved by themselves, clicking through the smoke like bones. Frank floated past, strapped to a hospital bed, mumbling formulas under his breath. The numbers spilled from his mouth like teeth. And still, the mist rolled. I began to understand. We weren't in the world anymore. We were in memory. Not ours individually, but something collective. A web of what was, what could have been, and what never should be. Somewhere inside this fog, Liam had triggered the inversion. And it hadn't just rewritten the code, it had unwritten the constants. Time wasn't moving. It was echoing. Every decision we made, every pain we carried was now looping in endless waves, folding reality in on itself. And unless we found the source, it would never stop. I pushed forward through scenes of our past lives. The refugee line where Sarah and I had first met, the underground lab Garrett had been taken to as a child, the day Frank buried his first prototype under a birch tree. None of it was linear. None of it was solid. I reached a clearing made of shattered mirrors. Each one showed a different possibility. One showed Liam growing up in peace, painting landscapes by the river. Another showed him turned to steel, his eyes cold, leading armies. A third showed him alone, forgotten, his body decaying in a forgotten loop of time. And then I saw the fourth mirror. It didn't show him, it showed me. I stepped forward, the ground cracking beneath me, and spoke into the whirlwind. We are not afraid. We are not broken. We are the flame that will light the darkness. The words felt like a shield and a sword, both fragile and fierce. Liam's form shimmered, as if weighing my soul, searching for truth in the chaos. In that moment, the storm paused. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, the vortex began to unravel, the fragments of light and shadow falling away like dead leaves. The world reformed around us, not perfect, but whole in its imperfection. Liam's form softened, becoming human again, the boy who had lost everything but still held the spark of life. We stood together on solid ground, the mist lifting to reveal a horizon touched by the first light of dawn. The journey was far from over, but the fracture had become the forge. We had faced the breaking and emerged as something new. The air hung heavy around us, thick with the weight of unspoken fears and shattered hopes. The dust had settled, but nothing felt settled inside. We were standing on the edge of everything we had known, the fragile illusion of safety now completely shattered by the truth we had uncovered. The wagon, the children, the men who had tried to claim them, and the very system that let such darkness fester, all of it pressed down on me like a relentless storm. But the storm outside was nothing compared to the one raging within. The children's faces haunted me. Their hollow eyes, their trembling bodies, they were the living echoes of a world that had turned its back on innocence. Sarah's small hand still clung to mine, but even she was no longer just a frightened girl. She was a symbol of resilience, a fragile yet fierce testament to the strength of hope. Thomas, the boy who had become both protector and brother, stood silently nearby, his eyes distant but fierce. There was a heaviness in his gaze, the kind that only comes from having seen too much too soon. I could feel every heartbeat around me, every breath drawn in the chill of the early morning. Frank was checking the children, his weathered hands gentle but sure, offering what little comfort he could. The soldiers had secured the area, but their presence felt like a thin veil between us and the darkness lurking just beyond the horizon. As dawn broke, the light revealed the scars of the night. The wagon was a battered shell, a cruel prison that had almost claimed lives. The men who had run the trafficking ring were now prisoners, but their defeat felt hollow, a small victory in a war that was far from over. I thought of the families waiting for their children, the broken promises of justice, and the long road ahead for healing and redemption. In the quiet moments, when the noise of chaos faded, I found myself questioning everything. Why had I risked so much for children I had never met? What was it that drove me to stand against so much darkness, armed with nothing but conviction and a rock? The answer was simple, yet profound, because someone had to. Because every child, every soul trapped in that nightmare, deserved a chance to be free, to be loved, to be more than cargo. The legal procedures, the endless bureaucracy, they were cold, impersonal shields against the raw pain of reality. I vowed silently that Thomas would not be lost in that system again. He deserved a home, a family, and a chance to rebuild the shattered pieces of his life. The thought of welcoming him into my lonely house filled me with a fierce, protective warmth I had thought was lost forever. But there was no time for comfort yet. The battle had changed us all. It had forced us to face our deepest fears and our greatest strengths. We were no longer just survivors. We were warriors of light in a world too often cloaked in shadow. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and heartbreak, but it was a path we would walk together. As I looked at the children, at their fragile forms and brave hearts, I felt a fire ignite within me. This was not the end, it was a beginning. A promise to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. To be the voice for the voiceless, the shield for the vulnerable. To turn pain into power, despair into hope. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows and bathing the world in a golden glow. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for the challenges ahead. With Thomas by my side and the others slowly healing, we would build a new family, one forged not by blood alone, but by courage, compassion, and unwavering love. This was our crucible, and from its flames we would rise stronger, unbroken, and ready to face whatever darkness dared to come. The silence that followed the chaos was deafening. The battlefield was no longer just the open plains or the broken wagon, it was the space inside me, inside all of us. We had fought with every ounce of courage, every breath taken in defiance of darkness. But now, as the dust settled and the morning sun poured over the scarred earth, the true battle began. I looked down at Thomas, sitting beside me on the creaking wagon seat. His face was calm, but behind those eyes lay a story that no child should ever have to carry. Months of pain, loss, and survival had aged him far beyond his years. Yet there was something unbroken inside him, a spark that refused to die. That spark was what I was going to protect. The others, Sarah, the younger children, were wrapped in blankets, their fragile bodies slowly gaining warmth and life. Frank stood nearby, his rifle lowered but his eyes watchful. The army medics moved with practiced urgency, their hands gentle as they tended to wounds visible and invisible. But the victory was bittersweet. Justice had been served, the traffickers in chains. But the scars they left behind would take a lifetime to heal. I felt the weight of that responsibility settling over me, a mantle heavier than any I had worn before. As we prepared to leave the desolate clearing, I made a silent vow to every child who had suffered in that wagon that they would never be forgotten, never left to face darkness alone again. And when I looked at Thomas, I knew this promise was personal. The journey back to my ranch was quiet. The land rolled by like a silent witness to everything that had happened and everything that would come. I thought about the house waiting for use, empty rooms, but with the possibility of life, laughter, and love. When we arrived, the first thing Thomas did was step inside and look around with cautious eyes. The house was big, too big for one person, but that was about to change. I showed him the little garden I tended, the worn bookshelves waiting for stories, and the porch where summer evenings stretched endlessly. It wasn't a palace, but it was a sanctuary, and it was ours. Days turned into weeks. Thomas learned to smile again. The haunted shadows in his eyes began to lift as he found strength in the simple rhythms of daily life. Together, we planted seeds not just in the garden, but in the fragile hope that a family could be built from broken pieces. Sarah called me Aunt Nora now, her laughter filling the rooms that had once known only silence. Frank visited often, his presence a steady reminder that none of us were truly alone. Letters arrived from the other rescued children, their words full of gratitude and newfound dreams. There were setbacks, moments when the past clawed its way back, threatening to undo all the healing. But we faced them together with courage, with patience, and with the fierce love that only those who have survived can know. I learned that family isn't always about blood. It's about who stands beside you in the darkness, who fights for you when the world turns its back. Thomas was more than a child I had saved. He was my brother in arms, my son in heart. And as the seasons changed, I understood that this was more than a rescue. It was a rebirth. Sometimes the most broken people find each other at exactly the right moment, and together they become whole again. So here we are, standing on the edge of what was and what could be. The road ahead is still long, but with every step, we move toward light, toward hope, toward home. If you've felt this story in your heart, if you believe in fighting for those who cannot fight for themselves, then I need you. Subscribe now to our channel, join our family, and be part of a community that stands up against injustice, that tells the stories that must be heard. Because every voice matters, every life matters, and together, we can change the world one story at a time. Click the video on your screen to hear another story of courage, hope, and the power of the human spirit. Don't just watch, be part of the journey.